Today's matchup is the Bunyans versus Pigsty.
Hello, Lad Lane Leopards. Today I'm reading The Bunyans, written by Audrey Wood and illustrated by David Shannon. Storyteller's Note. Now I suppose that you have heard about the mighty logger Paul Bunyan and his great blue ox named Babe. In the early days of our country, Paul and Babe cleared the land for settlers so farms and cities could spring up. And you probably know that Paul was taller than a redwood tree, stronger than 50 grizzly bears, and smarter than a library full of books. But you may not know that Paul was married and had 2 fine children. One day, when Paul Bunyan was clearing out a road through the forest of Kentucky, a great pounding began to shake the earth. Looking around, Paul discovered an enormous hole in the side of a hill. The lumberjack pulled up an acre of dry cane and fashioned a torch to light his way. Paul climbed inside the hole and followed the sound underground for miles, until he came to a large cavern glistening with crystals. By the flickering light of his torch, he saw a gigantic woman banging a behemoth pickaxe against a wall. It was love at first sight. "I'm Carrie McIntyre," the gigantic woman said. "I was sitting on the hill when my lucky wishbone fell down a crack into the earth. I've been digging all day trying to find it." With a grin on his face as wide as the Missouri River, Paul reached into his shirt pocket. "I've got one too," he said, pulling out his lucky wishbone. "Marry me, Carrie, and we'll share mine." Carrie agreed, and their wedding invitations were mailed out right away. The invitations were so large, only one needed to be sent to each state. Everyone could read them for miles. The invitation said, "You are cordially invited to the mammoth wedding of Paul Bunyan and Carrie McIntyre." The couple were married in the enormous crystal chamber that Carrie had carved. And after the ceremony, folks began to call it Mammoth Cave. The giantess had dug more than 200 miles, making it a long cave, the longest cave in the world. So the name fit perfectly. Paul and Carrie settled down on a farm in Maine, and soon there were 2 new Bunyans. While Pa Bunyan traveled with his logging crew, Ma Bunyan worked the farm and cared for their jumbo boy named Little Jean and their gigantic girl named Teeny. One morning when Pa Bunyan was home between jobs, Ma Bunyan cooked up a hearty breakfast of pancakes and syrup. Teeny was wrestling with her big purple puma named Slink and accidentally dumped a silo of syrup on her head. Teeny's hair was so sweet, bears crawled into it and burrowed deep in her curls. Try as they might, Pa and Ma Bunyan couldn't wash them out. "We'll need a forceful shower of water to get rid of those varmints," Mom Bunyan declared. Pa Bunyan had an idea. He placed his daughter on Babe, and he led them to the Niagara River in Canada. The gargantuan father scooped up a huge hole in the middle of the riverbed. As the great river roared down into the deep hole, Teeny cried out in delight. "Niagara Falls!" Teeny showered in the waterfalls, and the pesky bears were washed downstream. When little Jean was 5, he wanted to work too, so he followed his pa out to his logging camp in Montana. Thinking his son was too young to do much of anything, Paul set little Jean down in a barren canyon in Utah to play for the day. When the lumberjack went to fetch him, he couldn't believe his eyes. Little Jean had carved the canyon into a wonderland of fanciful shapes. Pa Bunyan got tongue-tied and said, "That's a mighty Bryce Nanyon. A mighty nice canyon, boy." Somehow, part of the mix-up stuck. To this day, the canyon is known as Bryce Canyon. After all that sculpting, little Jean's shoes were full of sand. Pa knew Ma Bunyan wouldn't want her clean floors dirtied up, so he told little Jean to sit down and empty his shoes. The sand from little Jean's shoes blew away on the eastern wind and settled down a state away. It covered a valley 10 miles long, making sand dunes 800 feet high. Everyone knows how the great sand dunes of Colorado came to be. One summer, little Jean and Teeny wanted to go to the beach. Ma Bunyan told them to follow a river to the ocean, but all the rivers flowed west back then, so they missed the Atlantic Ocean and ended up on the other side of the country instead. Ma Bunyan tracked them out to the Pacific Ocean. When she found Teeny riding on the backs of 2 blue whales and little Jean carving out 50 zigzag miles of the California coast. When Ma Bunyan saw what her son had done, she exclaimed, "What's the big idea, sir?" From that time on, the scenic area was known as Big Sur. Ma Bunyan knew she had to put up a barrier to remind her children not to wander off too far. So on the way home, everyone pitched in and built the Rocky Mountains. Teeny gathered up and sorted all of the rivers, letting some flow east and others flow west. After that, the children had no trouble following the eastern rivers down to the Atlantic Ocean, and when they wanted to go out exploring, Ma Bunyan would call out, "Now don't cross the Continental Divide, children." The best thing about camping is sleeping outdoors, and the worst thing is not having enough hot water. That's why the Bunyans always camped in Wyoming. By the time their camping years were over, Ma Bunyan had poked more than 300 holes in the ground with her pickaxe and released tons of hot water from geysers. But Ma got tired of poking so many holes, so she made a geyser that blew every hour on the hour. After that, there was a steady supply of hot water to keep the giant's clothes and dishes sparkling clean. Teeny named the geyser Old Faithful, and to this day, Old Faithful still blows its top every hour in Yellowstone National Park. As our great country grew up, so did the Bunyan children. When the kids left home, Ma and Pa Bunyan retired to a wilderness area where they still live happily. Teeny hitched a ride on a whale over to England and became a famous fashion designer. Her colorful skirts made from air balloons and her breezy blouses cut from ship sails were a sensation at the first World's Fair in London. Little Jean traveled to Venice, Italy, where he studied astronomy and art. Every day, the gondoliers would take their passengers down the Grand Canal to watch the giant artist chiseling his marble sculptures. After graduation, little Jean decided to explore new lands, as his parents had done. So he took 2 great jumps and 1 flying leap and bounded up into outer space. In 1976, the year our country's bicentennial, a spacecraft sent by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration was on a mission to study Mars. The spacecraft was named Viking 1, and it took many photographs of the surface of the planet. One mysterious photo looked like a face carved out of a colossal rock. Some say the photograph is not a face, but an illusion caused by light and shadows of the rocks. Others think the famous Martian face is just the splitting image of little Jean Bunyan. If that's so, who knows what he's up to on the other planets? Only time will tell.
Today's March Madness book is Pigsty by Mark Teague. Monday afternoon, Wendell Foltz's mother told him to clean his room. "It's turning into a pigsty," she said. Wendell went upstairs. Much to his surprise, a large pig was sitting on his bed. "Pardon me," said Wendell. He shoved some toys into his closet, but the pig didn't seem to mind the mess, and Wendell found that he didn't mind the pig either. He decided to take a break. When Wendell's mother came to look at his room, the pig was hiding, but the mess was still there. She threw up her hands. "Okay, Wendell," she said, "if you want to live in a pigsty, that's up to you." Wendell could hardly believe his luck. Now I can live however I want. He didn't even worry when he came home on Tuesday and found a second pig in his room. The mess had grown a bit worse, but he was able to jam most of it under his bed. "Pigs are all right," he said, "as long as it's only 1 or 2. In fact, they had a wonderful time. They played Monopoly until late each night, and left the pieces lying all over the floor. They had paper airplane wars and pillow fights. The bed became a trampoline. Then 2 more pigs showed up. The mess just grew and grew. That night, when Wendell went to bed, the pigs were lying everywhere. They rolled up in his blankets and hogged his pillows too. Wendell told himself he didn't mind, but then he found hoof prints on his comic books. And Friday, when he got home from school, he saw that someone had been sitting on his basketball. And his baseball cards were chewed. "That does it," said Wendell. "I've had enough." He ran downstairs to tell his mother. "Sorry," she said, "but your room is your responsibility." She handed him a broom. Wendell started to complain. The mess was too huge. But suddenly he remembered a saying he'd heard that many hooves make light work. He marched upstairs and organized a cleaning crew. They swept and scoured, polished and scrubbed. Later that afternoon, Wendell inspected his room and pronounced it clean. In fact, it was a bit too clean, from a pig's point of view. So while Wendell inspected, the pigs prepared to go home. One of them made a phone call, and a farm truck came to pick them up. They hugged and grunted and oinked goodbye. From that day on, Wendell kept his room clean. Except for those nights when his friends came by to play Monopoly. The end.
I hope you enjoy both books, and don't forget to vote.